The observer would like to advise that the following video comes with a trigger warning. The content in this video is of a sensitive nature, so please beware that the topic of this video may trigger you. The observer recommends that you consider your own mental health before you watch this video.
No, Fia's not the one who died from drugs. Fia died from injuries from head to toe. Hey Sandy, how are you doing now? Right, so we'll get on with the case. Thank you for all the apples, guys. Thank you so much. And thank you for the team bracelets, guys. I got mine removed after TV and I'd give everything to come back. I'm so sorry, Zoe. It feels like all the babies get removed to the babies that don't need to be. And the babies that need to be saved never get fucking saved. It pisses me off so much. Well, hello, observer. Fancy seeing you around here. Thank you for the heart, observer. Hope you're okay. Oh. Right, let's get into this case. I haven't started the case. Anyone coming in? I'm just about to start the case. We are talking about a high school shooting case today because something is happening in the media this week with this case, which I'll explain at the end of the case so it all makes sense. We are going to talk about a boy in 2001 who went to school with a gun and killed students at his school. Shall we turn the comments off? If we can, please. If everyone can send the Hutmies and the team gifts and we can get onto the popular, that's really helpful. If not, then please don't worry. Thank you, Mum. Thank you, Jasper. Yeah, just so we can keep up doing what we're doing on the app and keep getting awareness and keep showing people our lives is helpful. But thank you so much. Right, so we're going to talk about Charles Andrew Williams. And for the reference of this case, we're going to refer to him as Andy because he went by the name Andy. He was known as Andy Williams. Thank you guys for the team bracelets. Now, he was born in Maryland in 1986, and when he was 3 years of age, his parents divorced, and he was left with his father after his mum took his half-brother and moved away and left him behind. By all reports, he had a good father and a good relationship with his father. His father provided him with a loving home, and it was supportive, and his father said he never really struggled with Andy. He was a good kid. He could talk to his dad about anything and they got on really well. He would only really see his mother at Christmas, and that was just once a year. She would come and see him, bring him some presents, make loads of promises to him about keeping up with him for the rest of the year, and then she would be off like Joff and he would just not see her again. And I imagine for a kid that's really hard. Thank you guys for all the team bracelets. You're awesome, all of you. So he would be quite aware the whole time that his mum had kept his half-brother and hadn't wanted him. And he also felt like his father had him because he was kind of left behind, not because he particularly wanted him or fought for him, which wasn't overly fair because his father really was a good father and really did love him. Now, he remained in Maryland until December of 1999 with his father, when him and his father moved to 29 Palms in California. It's where his grandparents lived, and Andy seemed to thrive in a structural environment provided by his extended family. And so for the first time ever in 1999, when he was 10 years of age, and he moved to 29 Palms, which sounds a lovely place actually, he started seeing his nan and grandpa, and they had other children, so he had cousins around, and all of a sudden he's part of like this bigger family. And he seemed to thrive under this, like he was really feeling like part of a family, and he loved it there. And it was a much nicer area than they had been living in Maryland, which is quite a poor area they came from. He did well in school. He had many friends and started going to a Christian church. However, after a few months, his father took a job with the San Diego Naval Medical Center and informed his son, Andy, they would be moving to Santee in California. Now, this was really traumatic for Andy. He had finally felt like he'd found his place, and he felt like he was supposed to be in 29 Palms. He was enjoying his extended family life, the new school he had there, the atmosphere where they were living. And then his father gets this new job and they're off moving again. So for him, it felt like, oh, Joma, don't message me now. Can one of the mods, Kiki, Holly, someone, go over to Joma, because I miss him like mad, and tell him if he gives me half an hour, I'll request him. Because I love him and I hate saying no to him. So can someone please go and do that for me? Thank you. He's my favourite TikToker. Now, moving to a new town and switching schools can be a traumatic experience for any child, and the move meant Andy would be switching to his third school in a matter of months. Perhaps as a way of softening the blow, Andy's father allowed him to spend the summer of 2000 with his friends back in Maryland, which he went and done, and he had a really good time. Now, one thing his father was unaware of, thank you guys for all the team gifts, his father was unaware of, prior to moving to 29 Palms in California, Andy had become involved in drugs. And he was only 12 at this time. He had apparently started using cocaine and other narcotics back when he was 12 with friends. And I think the situation happened where he was at one of his friends' house. From what they described, it's kind of really vague, but it sounds like the friend had an older brother who offered both of the kids a couple of lines. Andy quite liked it and then would take money from his father to try and buy more. And it became something they did. Thanks, Hal, I know you've just done that. It became very much a problem. Now, 29 Palms was a conservative town with a military base there, a large one. So it wasn't the kind of place where kids could get into trouble. And this disciplined area where he had grandparents, there was a large naval base, a military base, and the kids were kind of so much more structured there, had meant that Andy had left the drugs behind in Maryland and had a new clean start. Now, when he was sent back to Maryland to spend the summer with friends, he instantly went back to using drugs. Now, Andy returned to California when the summer was over, but Santee was different from 29 Palms. His first night in the apartment complex where he was living with his dad, Andy was outside having a cigarette when he met one of his new neighbours who was looking for someone to join him in smoking some dope, and Andy had just made his first new friend. Now, outside of school, Andy spent the most time with Josh Stevens, Sean Turk, and AJ Gilbert. They preferred to frequent local skateboard parks, drinking alcohol and smoking pot together. Soon, Andy added an opioid addiction to his list of problems. The pills numbed the pain, as he was constantly being bullied at this new school. He was small for his age, much shorter, thank you, Kelly, much shorter than the other kids, thanks, Sarah, and he was small in frame. He was quite a weaselly-looking kid, and so they picked on him. And he then found that even the boys he'd been hanging around with at the skate park joined in on bullying him because he was an easy target and they were not going to defend him, so they just joined in. He was punched, kicked, and somebody actually set his trousers on fire with lighter fluid. Andy then met Christopher Reynolds through his friend Josh, whose mother was dating Christopher. It's very interwoven. And it was Christopher who would often supply the boys with drugs and alcohol. But the price would be steep, with Christopher being a sexual predator, a 29-year-old man who had a liking for teenage boys. And they would do whatever he wanted them to do because they needed the drugs and the alcohol, but none of them would ever open up about what kind of abuse they'd suffered at Christopher's hands. Now, by March of 2001, things were reaching a boiling point for Andy. He and Josh had been talking about running away to Mexico, but they didn't really have the resources to pull that off. Every last bit of money they'd ever got off their parents, of working little newspaper jobs and stuff, was all going into drugs. They didn't have any way of kind of getting money. Andy's dad was not well off where he could squirrel away money from his father, and they just didn't know what to do, but they kept fantasized about running away to Mexico. Now, Josh would be the first to pull out of the plan, claiming it wouldn't work. But however, to save face, because they'd been talking about it so much, Josh told the rest of the group that it was Andy who decided to back out and called him a wimp and a baby. And Andy was teased mercilessly for backing out. And they began to call him names such as GAY, FAG, because of this backing out of the plan. Now, for someone like Andy who had been sexually abused by his friend's mum's boyfriend, those names were a catalyst of something inside of him setting fire, and this rage from within him. Now, this often happens when young boys are essayed by other males, that because of the trauma, they start to question whether they may be GAY, whether it's their fault, whether it was something kind of a signal they gave off. Often other children, when they find out this has happened to a boy, they start throwing around those words, which is so harmful. It's re-traumatizing a kid all over again. Like, people need to understand that any kind of sexual abuse is not ever the victim's fault. It's not a choice. A child cannot protect themselves. They definitely cannot consent. And even in a situation where you're swapping it for something like drugs, that is still grooming. It's still a process of predatory behaviour. Like, this part of the story is 100% not Andy's fault. Like I've told you up till now. Thank you, Sarah, so much. The kid had a really hard time. He didn't belong anywhere. He'd moved several times. He didn't have a mother around. He was hooked on drugs. Opioids then came into it. Like, it's such a serious addiction. So many different things here started to go wrong. Now, Andy may have been eager to get out of town because his dad had finally learned that he was skipping school and failing all his classes. Livid, his father drove to the high school and confronted Andy's guidance counsellor. He wanted to know why the school hadn't called him to let him know that Andy had been skipping classes. Thank you, Miss Spence. Oh, it's good to see you. I haven't seen you for a while. He soon found out they had been calling him. It wasn't school policy. It was school policy, sorry. Are you okay?
Yeah.
You got my bank card?
Yeah, you will.
Can you put it back in my wallet, because I'll forget before I get to the taxi tomorrow. Look at your hair. You look so beautiful. You look a little model.
Lovely.
Do you like your hair?
Yeah.
It looks so good.
Mm-hmm.
Love you.
Love you. Give me 1 second. Have you got a drink? No, I'm fine.
Are you sure? Okay, so it was school policy and they followed it. Each day that Andy wasn't in school, they called the apartment, left a message on the answer phone message, and then Andy would come home and delete those messages so his father didn't get them. So on March the 2nd, thank you, Carol, Andy was prepared for class as usual, and the teacher let him know that she wasn't happy with him as soon as she got there. When he come into class, she said to him, you haven't been here. She berated him in front of the whole class. She called his effort lackadaisical. She said he had no work ethic. She said he'd never be anything. She said that he was letting himself and his father down, that he should have been embarrassed of himself, that he was setting himself up for a shit future, basically. And it wasn't the first time that one of his teachers had been critical of him. But for some reason, this time really bothered him. And it was probably a whole series of events, like the drugs, the friendship group pulling apart from him, the name calling, the sexual abuse, not having a mother, his father being furious at him going into school and being berated. Like, this kid already felt ashamed, okay? He wasn't living a life that was anywhere good. And then a teacher calls him up and tells him all these horrible things about himself. And anyone knows, as a parent or a teacher, for every criticism you give a child, you need to give them 50 compliments in order to eradicate it. So when you stand there and you and I get that from Dr. Phil, so it's definitely right. He always says, for every critique, you say 50 attaboys. So, to stand a kid up who doesn't really have anything good about them at that moment, doesn't feel good, and to tell them, what a crappy person they are. Thank you for the team growth, guys. This time really hit him in a different way. Let me just check something. Right, okay. Now, even after he left class that day, he couldn't stop dwelling on his teacher's comments. He had already been depressed for a while, and now he began contemplating unaliving himself. He had made such a mess out of his life that option seemed to be the only viable one left. Thank you, Trisha. Still, when he spoke with his friends about what happened in class, he was careful not to let them see how upset the teacher had made him. Instead, he tried to convince them that he was really angry. Thank you, Hong Kong. Thank you, Hong Kong. He was trying to pretend he wasn't sad. He's like was holding back tears, so he began just to rant and rave. A lot of males do that. They think that crying, etc., is very vulnerable. So he began to become angry and say that he wanted to shoot his teacher. Thank you for Team Bracelet, guys. We're still not even on the popular board, man. It must have been a good day for TikTok today, and I didn't do an afternoon live today. At that point, it was just an idle threat that he made, which, to be fair, is quite common against teenagers, where you say something like, I wish they were dead, or I wish I could do this, or I wish I would do that. But because he said it, his friends began to mock him. And I use the term friends very loosely because his friends were constantly ready to attack him. They told him he was all talk and he would never be able to carry out any plan. They reminded him of the fact, like, you said you were going to run away to Mexico, you ruined that plan, you backed out, you're an FAG. Like, they just carried on going on. Thank you, Laura Bradshaw. And they were doing this and they were making him feel awful. So on March the 3rd, it was a Saturday, and despite the fact Andy was supposed to be grounded, his father had a special surprise for him. He was taking him hand gliding as a late birthday present. They had fun together, and his father was in such a good mood he agreed to allow Andy to go to his friend's house that night. He also told Andy they would be going to look at a nearby condo he was planning to buy on Sunday, a move he believed would be a positive one for Andy because it showed that they were going to stay in the area that they could build there. Thanks, Hong Kong. It showed that they were going to lay down roots and actually buy somewhere. Thank you, Scooby. As usual, there's a party going on at Josh's house that evening, and there was loads of alcohol involved. Somehow, somebody brought up the topic of shooting a teacher up, and this time it was Josh that suggested it. He even got some paper and drew a diagram of the school, and then he assigned people to different areas of the school, as if he was planning some kind of military attack. Josh would be stationed in one hallway, thank you guys, AJ in another, and Andy was assigned to the boys' bathroom. Josh told Andy he could use a revolver belonging to his father and that he and AJ would each take one of the shotguns. Now, there are about 50 people at this party. Thank you, Hong Kong. Thank you, Nicola. Teenagers, adults, and all of them heard this talk. They all saw the boys sat there in a group talking about how they were going to shoot up Santana School, how they were going to be in different parts of the building, how they were going to take different weapons, how they had access to these weapons. And then they discussed it for half an hour while they were high on drugs, and then they crumpled up the plans, threw them in the bin, and Andy would later say it was a sign that Josh was backing out of the plan, but it also gave him the idea that if he wanted to be respected, he would have to carry out the plan. Now, later that night, once he was back at home, Andy claimed that he calmed down and he had decided that actually he really didn't want to shoot anyone. But just as he decided not to go through with it, his phone rang, and it would be Christopher Reynolds. Now, that is the man that has the 29-year-old man who has been sexually abusing Andy and his friends. According to Andy, Chris said that Josh had told him all about the shooting plans, and he was calling to make sure that Andy actually planned to carry out them. Supposedly, Chris also said if Andy refused to go through with the attack, Chris would kill Andy. Now, none of this makes any sense. But we know a phone call happened that night between Chris and Andy. However, we'll never know what was said during that call. Andy couldn't really explain later on why Chris would even care if the high school shooting took place, or why Chris would threaten to kill him if it didn't. It wasn't like Chris had anyone at the school that he would want dead. He had no prior ties to the school apart from his girlfriend's kid was there, so it just seems like a really bizarre thing to say. Now, Andy didn't sleep well that night, but when he woke up the next morning, his mind was made up. He wasn't going to let anyone say he'd backed out of something else, especially not shooting up the school. He unlocked his father's gun cabinet, took out a pistol and approximately 40 bullets, and then he got ready for school. He had resolved himself to the fact this would become his last day alive. Before he left for school, AJ stopped by to return a bicycle that he'd borrowed from his dad, but Andy told him he had no longer any need for it, so AJ could keep it. And at that point, AJ knew what was going on. And AJ asked Andy when the shooting was going to take place, and Andy told him, I will be waiting in the boys' toilets like we planned. Now, AJ didn't try to talk him out of it. If anything, he just made a comment about how most murders took place on a Monday, and he told Andy that it had been nice knowing him, and then he left. I think this is really important to point this out. Like, if this is true, like all of this story up until now, or even the call with Christopher, over 50 adults and children up until this point knew that the plan was for Andy to do this, and not one person alerted any authorities, not one person. I mean, even if you thought it was just boys talking, they're writing it down on paper, they're talking about what guns they're going to take. Then we've got AJ turning up and Andy's like, nice knowing you, I'm not going to be here for much longer, I'm about to do something stupid. Thank you, Scooby. And yet no one still steps in to do anything. Even if you don't care about Andy, like, it could have been any amount of innocent people's lives that were taken that day and you did nothing. Thank you, Tasha. Each morning at school, Andy would join a group of about 30 students at the fast food restaurant across the street from school. He arrived at that restaurant as usual around 8:30, and 8 o'clock. And because of the threats he'd been making, some of his friends were concerned that he might possibly have a weapon on him. So they actually patted him down before leaving the restaurant for school. Satisfied he didn't have a gun on him, they dropped the subject. Unfortunately, none of those children thought to check his backpack. Thank you, Kaz, for subscribing. Thank you guys so much. We've got a subwave going on, but thank you so much, guys. Sometime around 9 a.m, Andy entered a stall in the boys' bathroom and loaded the gun. When he opened the door to the stall, there were 2 boys in the bathroom. 14-year-old Brian Zucker and 17-year-old Trevor Edwards. Momentarily losing his nerve, Andy quickly shut the door to the stall again and had a minute to regroup. He had encountered running into anyone he knew, and he was in the same class as Brian, the same English class. After a couple of false starts, he told himself he would open the stall door one more time, and if anyone knew he was still in the bathroom, he would just leave. He would later say he didn't realise that Brian was still in the bathroom, and when he opened the stall door for the final time around 9:20 a.m, a friendly, happy boy who dreamed of one day being a professional stuntman, Brian had his back to Andy, and most likely never heard Andy firing the gun. The barrels of the gun was about 2 feet from the back of Brian's head when he pulled the trigger, killing him instantly. And this is Brian, who lost his life. This is Brian Zucker. Andy then swung the gun round and fired at Trevor, striking him in the neck. He fell to the ground but was still alive and asked Andy why he had shot him. Andy told him to shut up. Next, he fired at Tim Essay, a student and teacher who had a misfortune of being in the restroom at the time. He looked up to see Andy staring at him with a blank look on his face. Tim turned to run, but Andy opened fire on him. A bullet entered his back and exited through his abdomen, but he was unable to move after that and couldn't run away due to the fact his legs would no longer work, but he managed to safely drag himself along the floor and hide. A couple of students ran to help him and lifted him off the ground. Afraid they would injure him more if they tried to drag him, they had to put him in a food cart and rolled him to safety. He was evacuated from the school in a helicopter, and when he got to the hospital, doctors said he was lucky to be alive. Now, Peter Ruiz, who had just started work at the campus security at the high school, heard what he thought was firecrackers and raced to the sound. Andrew Kafori, a 17-year-old student, dashed into the restroom with Peter. As soon as they pushed their way into the bathroom, they could see Brian and Trevor laying on the floor. Trevor yelled for them to get out, and Andrew noticed at the time that Andy had a gun and was pointing at him. He and Peter turned and fled the bathroom, but Andrew managed to make it to safety without being hit, but Peter wasn't as lucky. As he was running out the bathroom with his hands up, Andy shot him 3 times. He was hit in the back, side and shoulder, and he didn't get far from the bathroom before he collapsed on the ground. Steve DeMiller, a senior who was outside the bathroom talking with his girlfriend, watched in horror as he saw the guard fall to the floor, bleeding heavily. Reflexively, Steve grabbed his girlfriend and ran for cover. Peter, though badly injured, would survive, but the fallout from post-traumatic stress disorder would be fierce. A year after the attack, the 22-year-old was still suffering from crying jags and had to be transferred to a different school. Randy Gordon, a 17-year-old senior, was in the common area with his best friend Raymond Soretto. Both were shot. Randy would die from his injuries. And this is Randy here. Now, Randy died from his injuries. An avid runner, he was on the school track team and he had enlisted to go into the Navy. He was scheduled to begin military training immediately after graduation, and he was hoping his military experience would lead to a career as an FBI agent. Classmates said he was one of the smartest students in the school, someone who's loved to read and always loved to have the right answers in class. Ironically, Randy was a member of the campus Peace Council, a group that looked for ways to prevent things such as bullying and high school shootings from occurring. Melissa McNulty, a sophomore, was in the back hallway near the boys' bathroom when Andy came out. She could hear the commotion, and when she looked over, she was surprised to see a boy she didn't know pointing a gun at her. She stared in disbelief as he pulled the trigger, striking her in the arm. She would spend a month in the hospital and endure multiple surgeries to correct the damage to her arm, but the psychological damage she suffered was even worse. Matthew Hire, a senior, was walking towards the bathroom when he saw a student on the ground bleeding from the mouth. Before he had time to realise what was going on, Andy had come out of the bathroom and was pointing a gun in his direction. He tried to run but took a bullet to the hip. He had surgery after an infection developed, but doctors weren't able to remove all of the bullet fragments, leaving him with a permanent reminder to this day. Barry Gibson, an 18-year-old senior, was hit in the leg. Years later, he would suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and pain flare-ups from the bullet still lodged in his leg. Travis Tate, also 18-year-old senior, was shot in the lip and left with a permanent facial scar. Dealing with night terrors and other aspects of PTSD would be permanent for him as well. In total, Andy would return to the bathroom to reload his gun 3 times and use most of the bullets he had brought with him. Police would arrive on scene just as he returned to the bathroom for the 4th time. Despite his insistence that unaliving himself was the ultimate goal, as soon as he saw the police, he threw down his gun and surrendered instantly. Police were worried about the possibility there was more than one gunman, and Andy would refuse to dispel that notion, telling them that there may be other shooters inside. Now, he was immediately arrested and taken into custody, and this is him in the back of the police car on that day. To me, he looks so young that he looks like 12. Now, the shooting would only last for 6 minutes, but it would continue to send shockwaves through the community for far longer. As word of the shooting spread, panicked parents began congregating in the school parking lot and in the grocery store across the street from the school. Students poured into the lot in waves as soon as they escaped from the building, and they made tearful reunions with their parents. Other parents paced around with cell phones pressed to their ears, frantically dialing and redialing their child's phone number, praying they would pick up the phone. When Andy sat down with investigators, he insisted that he had never been bullied or teased at school, but he hadn't been doing well in classes and he didn't want to have to move again. He added that while he hadn't intended to kill anyone, if someone happened to die, he said, "Oh well." He also told the officers that the shooting had been a stupid idea and he wished he hadn't have done it. It wasn't until he had been in the interview room for more than an hour that the seriousness of the situation seemed to sink in, and he began breaking into tears. Dr. Charles Scott, a psychiatric facility manager who worked at the police station and prisons, actually treated Andy after he'd been arrested. In his opinion, Andy had known fully what he was doing when he brought the gun to the school, but he was hoping he'd be reported to a teacher before he actually shot anyone. He was hoping by bringing a gun to school, his classmates would be impressed with him and would view him as someone they thought was tough and strong. I don't agree with that. I don't think he did anything to be caught. And if at one point, when the classmates were feeling him down to see if he had a gun, you would have been like, I do have one in my backpack. If you really wanted to earn their respect or even fear, you'd be like, I did bring one, and you would allow them to talk you out of it. You didn't just go into the bathroom and load your gun once. You did it. You tried to do it 4 times. You did it 3. And you continued to shoot people. If you were doing it purely to come across as tough and strong, you would have maybe gone out and shot one person and then purposely got caught or not refired the gun. Now, one of the most disturbing aspects of this whole case is the fact that a large number of people, both students and adults, had heard Andy threaten to shoot at the school and had even helped him to plan it. One friend said he truly believed Andy had been joking and decided not to tell any teachers because he didn't want Andy to get in trouble over a joke. In June of 2002, Andy pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder and 13 counts of attempted murder. There was no plea bargain involved, and he didn't want to force the victim's family to have to go through trial. In the 15 months since the shooting, Andy went through a growth spurt, and the 6-foot-tall young man who appeared in court bared little resemblance to a teenager. In a way, it was another sad reminder of another life that would be lost. If he could have just held out for a year, he would have become bigger, stronger, and the other kids may not have bullied him. He would have been capable of standing up for himself. Instead, he took the easy way out and armed himself with a gun, meaning 2 teenage boys, both of them with so much promise, were dead and an entire school would be traumatised forever. During Andy's sentencing hearing, the prosecutor argued that the bullying he had been subjected to was in no way justified his actions. He chose to hang out with the same kids who were bullying him, and he was trying to convince them he was tougher than they were. Chris Anton, who was the prosecutor, said he wanted to become the bully of a crowd of bullies. His friends may have egged him on, but ultimately he was the one and the only one responsible for his actions. The DA asked the court to impose the maximum sentence, 425 years in prison. Now, Andy was then given a chance to speak to the court, and he did. He cried quite a bit. This is him in court. And he said he felt horrible about what he had done, and he wished that he could go back in time and change everything. Judge Herbert agreed with the prosecution the crime had been vicious and fiendish, but also noted that Andy had had a very difficult home life and had never been in trouble with the law prior to that day. He imposed the minimum sentence of 50 years in prison, with the extended thing of 50 to life, and noted with credit for the time he had already served, Andy would be eligible for parole in 2051. However, the reason we're talking about this case today is because Andy is up for parole. He had his parole hearing today. We won't hear a result of that. So what's happened basically is in the interim, so in the last 5 years, there have been several separate law reforms, which means that he can technically, anyone who is under 16 at the time they commit murder should be able to be released at 25. However, he's now 38 years of age. He's still in prison for this crime. So they are saying that he deserves a chance of going up for parole. However, the victims of the Santana High School shooter are fighting against this, saying their lives have been forever destroyed. This is literally down to a technicality that he'll even get a chance at parole. Do I think he'll get it? I don't know. I really don't know, because the new kind of rules mean that he at least has a chance at parole, and they may take into consideration his lifestyle before, his trauma, the fact that he is a different man now than he was at 15. I'm not quite sure how I feel about it. I don't know exactly how I feel about it. Which was this one? I just want to see if this was what I wanted. So what does this say here? So he's been in prison for 23 years now. It says on his local newspaper, it's been 23 years since 15-year-old Charles Andy Williams took his father's revolver to school and repeatedly opened fire, killing 2 students and injuring 13 others. Tomorrow, as a result of a new law regarding youthful offenders, he will have his first parole hearing, drawing a strong response from community members, many still traumatised and grieving. We will turn on the comments, and I just want to kind of, I'll put some pictures up big, just to show you. And if we do flood the chat with blue hearts, because both of the boys that lost their life both the victims were blue boys, which is always what we do. And then we'll talk a little bit about what people think should be the punishment and whether he should be paroled or not. Hang on a second. What's going on? Oh, I've just missed it. Hang on, let me just do this puzzle piece on the screen because it's doing my head in. If I don't do a puzzle in real life, I don't really want to do it on the screen. Who's requesting to come in my box? Abigail, do you know you're requesting the box, dude? So you may have done it by accident. What's that picture of? Oh yeah. So this is him when he was in court a year after the shooting. This is the school. His victims. We must remember there's not just 2 victims to this. There's many people who either shot or even lived through a school shooting who are still suffering this to this day with PTSD, panic attacks, night terrors. This is him in his yearbook. This is him now. This was taken in August. This is the memorial for the kids at that school. This was some of the images from the news. I've only got that one, to be fair. I'm going to do a poll whether smiley face if you think he should have a chance at freedom, and a crying face if you think he should die in prison. I think I may have a very different opinion on this than a lot of people, to be fair. I may not please everyone with my decisions, but I do think I can promise you it's based on the education behind it, but also obviously everyone is free to have their own opinion. Like, everyone knows what they think is wrong or right. I'll just wait for the vote to be finished. Why is my vape making a weird bubbling noise? Eye for an eye. This is, it's going to finish now anyway. So it's almost 50-50. Now, it's very even. What did you think, Gray? I'd be interested in what you thought. I'm not just highlighting you out, but I just think you're a man, so your decision may be different. I personally have, I'm not doing another case tonight, we're just doing that high school shooting, but I just want to say, like, I think he should have a chance at parole. I do think he should. I think he lives in a society in America which is set up to destroy children. It is set up that you can easily get your hands on a gun. And well, in the UK, right now we have a knife crime problem, which is obviously getting as bad as their gun problem. But when we teach children that they can permanently end something with a gun, which we make it free to get inside their home. So if you imagine when you're having a rage, anyone in this room, or you're feeling like, I want to fucking destroy the world, if right at your hands at the age of 15, you have a weapon in your hand of mass destruction, you can just take life and make a very permanent decision. When they are literally raised. I can tell you that I've read a lot of his writings from prison, the things that he says, the fact he had an opioid addiction, the fact that he was living in a really shitty situation, that he wanted to get his mum's attention, that his dad was always at work. Like, there is no excuse for the taking of the lives. But the mind that you have, I get that, so I 100% get that. He served 23 years in prison. He has lost his whole childhood. He has lost his age where he can have children. But in the grand scheme of things, in this country, for doing exactly the same crime, he would have got 14 years. Or look at James Bulger's killers. That's not a good thing because they got out and they reoffended. But there is lots of chances where I do believe that he has to actually have a chance at parole. I'm not saying he should get parole now. Maybe he should do another 10 years. Maybe he should do another 20 years. But I think he should at least have a chance to go before a parole board and tell them why he should have a chance at parole, what he has done to make changes, what courses he has done, whether he can take full accountability, whether he is haunted by what he's done, whether he would, all of those things. I get that his victims have no life. But I do think that he should have a chance. And that is because the law says that at 15 years of age, you are in the juvenile court. Back then it said you would be sentenced as an adult. That's what I know. It is hard. Like, I'm not even saying, like, if the parole board said no, he's staying in, I wouldn't be angry at that, because I believe that if they've been there and they've listened to him and they think now you're still fucking dangerous, keep him in. But I do think a 15-year-old boy who was being raped, who was on opioids, who was being bullied, who had moved several times, who had no mother, he didn't stand a fucking chance. What life could he have had? Like, opioids from 12. Like, that teenage brain, the teenage male brain, full of rage, full of all those things. Like, you don't know what that would do to someone. Like, I don't even know how much he comprehended. Like, I'm going to go and do this, and this is fucking forever. Because he was fucked. The fact that he started taking opioids at 12, his mind would have stopped at 12. Like, I get that, Hattie, and I understand that. And I still think, he didn't just kill his bullies, he killed random good kids and all the rest of it. So there is two sides, but I have to consider, as a parent as well, if my child had perhaps done something like that, would I want people to write them off for the rest of his life? Would I like the fact that there would be... There's two chances of it, Claire, because what if it had been my child who had been the shooter? So I look at it from all sides. And do I believe there can be some rehabilitation? Yes, I do. I have to, because I wouldn't cover these cases if I didn't believe in rehabilitation. I wouldn't. His dad, yes, has a really good relationship with him. He's even written a book about it. I don't know what's happened to Christopher. That's a really interesting question. I have to look at both sides. I definitely have to look at both sides. At the age of 15, you do know right from wrong. But at the same time, he served 23 years, almost like double his life in prison. You know, I think if I had lived his life and I had been raped, I had been a mother and father who didn't realise what was going on, if I'd been on every kind of drugs, I'd been bullied, I'd been moved from area to area, could I have had rage and hatred in my heart? Probably. Would I have done that? Probably not, but we're not all the same. I get it. That's why it was, do you know what I mean? That's why it was halfway, and I think it depends on how you look at justice, how you look at reform, how you look at rehabilitation. Do you know what I see? I see a child who killed children, and we've already lost 2 children. Maybe he could do something good with his life in the memory and the names of the other 2 children. Maybe he could go on to do something really amazing. Maybe he could go into schools and talk to kids and stop them becoming another high school shooter. So that's what I see in this. And I get that a lot of you think I'm wrong, and I do not need everyone to agree with me. I can only present you the case and you make up your own mind. I'm not mad at anyone else for having a different opinion. I think society, we're too quick to fucking damage and destroy our children, and then when they fuck up, go, you're evil. Society made him fucking evil, man. Not always so. Sometimes I've seen some people released from prison for murder because the victim's family have stood there and said, do something with your life. You deserve a chance because my son didn't get one. Do something with your life. So it's not always that way. There are a lot of people out there with a lot of forgiveness in their heart. Yeah, Rachel, they will announce it, but it'll probably be a couple of weeks. Can we get Joma or not? Can someone go to Joma and tell him to request me? And if you haven't met Joma before, you need to stay around for this because he's the best person on the app. He's my favourite person on this app. Like, my favourite creator, he is. He literally... no, not if it was one of yours, Hayley. I don't know, Sal. I don't know. I think you have to look at both sides sometimes, and I think I have to believe a little bit in the justice system, and I have to think that if the justice system say he needs to stay there for another 10 years, he does. Ideally, like one day he will come out, because I cannot throw away all children who commit crime. I can't. Like, I have to believe there's more. The justice system is flawed. 100% is flawed. It's broken. But the whole system is flawed. There's so many, Thought Chocolate was my favourite. I've got so many favourites, man. In this moment, Joma's my favourite. When you meet him, you'll understand. Hayley. Like, literally, this boy is literally, he is sunshine. Joma is 24. He's pure sunshine. Everyone in my community loves him. Loves him. I will lose a battle all day to Joma on purpose. I will lose a battle on purpose to him. He's from Syria. He doesn't just sit there and beg. Like, you send him a hand heart, he'll flip. Actually do a flip. He has my name written all over his walls as his home. He is so grateful. He's beautiful to look at. He's a really good guy. He is so excitable. Like, you send him a rose and he's like, thank you.
The Observer, providing you with the latest TikTok drama from across the UK.